There's a rise in Islamophobia. Are psychology training programs, supervisors, faculty members in the field of mental health equipped to address it? What are some ways to start including the work and perspectives of mental health that have long existed in many cultures, including Islam, before modern Western psychology? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zhen. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Rossol Gharib. Rossol holds a Master of Arts in Forensic Psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice and published her thesis, which explored the impact of white racial identity on punitive attitudes towards juvenile offenders. Rossol is currently in a doctoral program in clinical psychology. Rossol worked as a co-investigator at John Jay College, where she studied wrongful convictions in serial rape cases, examining factors like police misconduct and eyewitness testimony. She has also served as a principal investigator in the Social Justice Laboratory, focusing on the intersection of racial identity and juvenile criminal legislation. In addition to her research, Rossol has experience in clinical settings, working as a senior case manager at St. Mary's Hospital, where she conducted mental wellness assessments and developed individualized treatment plans for clients with severe mental illness. Now, Rossol's commitment in mental health advocacy goes beyond her research and academic work. She also volunteered at the Islamic Center of Passaic County, where she constructed mental health initiatives with local spiritual mosque leaders and created a network of therapist contacts and social work agencies to assist with community mental health needs. As an Arab North African therapist, Rossol will be discussing ways in which supervisors and training programs can address Islamophobia and create an inclusive learning environment. Rossol, thank you so much for being on our podcast. It's really a pleasure and just wonderful to have you on our show today.
No, thank you so much for having me. This
Wow.
is what you do is really great.
Thank you. I mean, I'm amazed by the work that you're doing, the publication, the advocacy. Oh my gosh. I mean, you're getting forensic science. And now with psychology, there's a lot of different areas.
Yes.
Like clinical counseling. However, your specialty is in forensic psychology. So can you just maybe briefly for our listeners, for you, define forensic psychology for us?
So forensic psychology is the intersection of law and psychology. And so you see that mainly when we talk about interrogation techniques, the laws that we have as to how to interview minors, how we conduct photo lineups, actual lineups. It permeates a lot within the criminal justice context. Anywhere where the state gets involved or an individual gets involved within a state system, you'll see a lot of psychology that goes into it, that plays a role.
Sorry, I'm just curious, fascinated. Are immigration evaluations considered a component within forensic psychology, like the VAWA evaluations and so forth?
You can definitely have forensic psychologists that do those evaluations because they also bring in a bit of the legal context too, as to what is permissible, what is not permissible, and really understanding if the person understands the proceedings that are about to take place. And so depending on the person's age range, they can then figure out, how do I test their competency of what's going on and actually provide a recommendation to the courts if I personally believe that this person does not know what is happening and there's no way that you can get them to understand, either because of a cultural difference or because there is a language barrier and the court is not able to provide a translator that would do an effective job of really relating the information across.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that summary for folks. Why don't you just tell me a little bit more of what you're currently doing?
So right now I am in a PhD program in UMass Boston, and I currently, like one of the what we're working on is clinical psychology, but as well as like bringing in the forensic psych portion of it. And so with the forensic psychology portion right now, kind of working on addressing some of the gaps within the research that we have, specifically when we're talking about competency testing, and also trying to assess for the insanity defense. And so like one of those is like looking into extreme overvalued beliefs, which is a relatively new concept, and it could kind of be understood when we talk about incels, when we talk about QAnon. And so how do we differentiate when someone holds on to these types of beliefs that we might find to be really unusual, but at the end of the day are just this person's beliefs, but does not mean that it is due to psychosis, due to delusion, but rather it's just this is what they truly believe, and they felt like that they needed to take on, extreme measures to be able to protect those beliefs. So that's just like one of the things that we're doing, as well as trying to address. So I guess this is more of like on the identity piece of we're trying to use Bobby Wright's concept of menticide, basically the way of how the global north has been able to suppress folks from African and Black descendants. And so trying to use those mechanisms of how do we uplift those communities now, those countries that unfortunately are going through like this type of suppression of consciousness. But
Can
yeah,
you give me an example of the suppression of consciousness? Like, how does that play out?
Yeah, absolutely. So like when we talk about like global intervention, or I guess like imperialism, when we talk about the United States, particularly the United States and Britain, with how in a lot of the African countries that we see, where we find that they play a role within the politics. So you can have people that are starting to revolt, that are starting to want democracy, want more freedoms, independence. And then all of a sudden you find that there is like a swooping in of these powers that quash it, and then also make sure that people don't almost that they don't want to continue raising their voice anymore. And how do you do that? By making sure that you put sanctions on people, the tariffs that you have, making sure that the education system values a Western educational style rather than a more African-centered style, by making sure that English is the best language that you need to learn, and therefore that you need to forego your original language because you need to be part of the Western society in order for you to advance. And so it almost makes it seem as if we have this standard of success, and the standard of success is this white European standard, and therefore for you to obtain that type of success, you need to shed your identity, you need to shed your indigenous roots within your land. Yeah.
Well, would you go as far as to say, because this has been actually talked about with other speakers, it's the idea that, psychology in the West is the gold standard. And we have had guest speakers who have, been consultants who've talked about their experience saying, gosh, here I am trying to talk to psychologists in another country about the ethics of, Western psychology, also acknowledging, wait, is this really the standard you want to apply? But this is the only framework you have because psychology in other countries are perceived as relatively new. Would that be an example of this idea of also maybe imposing standards and ideas? Okay.
No, you're absolutely right on that. And I think that's which is really interesting, because I think we see that now within the United States is like we're trying to be very much more culturally competent, where that really has not reached abroad yet, because it's seen as like, oh, what do you mean that we have to include our culture into this? What do you mean that we have to make these types of accommodations? Like, I thought we were just supposed to use the white Eurocentric standard as the way to treat everybody. Yeah.
Okay. So this is just really fascinating. And so let's shift gears here, in terms of the focus for today, because we don't talk enough about this, which is how to address Islamophobia in training programs. I mean, it's, I think for many training programs, it's difficult to admit that
Yeah.
this stuff can be, can actually happen. Give us some examples or ideas that you have regarding ways in which supervisors and training programs can address Islamophobia.
I think like what makes this a bit difficult is that I definitely see that like training programs are trying to be more inclusive, and I think it's almost as if like, what do we do? And I'll say that like one of the things is being able to within the conversation within classrooms, I think being able to acknowledge the fact that like one of the diversity factors is also spirituality. I think usually we do a really good job of, well, at least maybe I could say this my program and the programs that I have kind of been in close contact with, is that it very much makes sure to address race as well as like being able to address sexuality and gender. And I think it does it in a very great way. I think one of the nuances that gets lost is the spirituality portion, right? And I'm not even just saying like it has to be like within Islam, but even like Christianity, Judaism. And I think being able to incorporate that within training models, within, like how do you have these discussions with these types of clients and it not being seen as psychosis, right? Like that a person is very deeply holds these deep spiritual beliefs, and it's basically that this is the way that they navigate life. How do we make sure that we don't weaponize that in a way that is going to be deemed as like delusion or psychosis? And so I think what is really helpful for programs is to acknowledge that this is also one of the diversity factors, and that I guess a way to also combat that is to bring that elephant in the room, right? Like, I don't think that conversations ever go well when we shy away from, already having students that are in the room that identify as Muslim or specifically look Muslim. When I say specifically look Muslim, like literally within a hijab, but and also being able to accommodate the fact that, like going to pray. And I believe that definitely that was one of the things that I was a little bit surprised by, was that, like I'd be sitting in class and I would kind of just be like, hey, by the way, like, I'm just going to like take 5 minutes to go run and pray. Like it's time for me to pray. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, we're just going to take a break anyways. You know what? Like, go ahead, do your thing. We're just going to take a class-wide break just so you don't have to feel like you're missing out on things, which I definitely felt was amazing to hear, is that I have these professors in front of me that are willing to accommodate, where they're like, you know what? Okay, one of us is gone. And at the end of the day, we're going to wait for them rather than just like continue on, because they also saw how important it was to me. And so therefore they made sure to implement it within their classroom. And I feel like these are just like, I don't want to say like small things, but definitely I feel like they're just like little changes that definitely make the person feel as if though, okay, I'm really part of this. I don't have to set aside one facet of my identity or one dimension of my identity to be able to be part of this bigger group. And so I feel like if only that there's more programs out there that are doing the same thing, I think would be amazing. And I will say that I am very lucky with the fact that UMass is known for its multiculturalism, it's known for its social justice, and therefore it acts upon it. And the way that they do that is by making sure that every student feels safe and supported. And I think it's just kind of like a oh yeah, we have this model, I want to share it with everybody type of
Yeah,
type.
I mean, I can see the excitement. In fact, when you were talking about how the professor created a space to do that in a very like, this is just a matter of fact, it's just what we do, as opposed to this is some out of the ordinary experience, It's just like, all right, well, hey, let's just take a break, everyone, Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, like it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that's the part that's like really beautiful, is just like you normalized it. Like I didn't have to do it, you did it for me type of thing. So I think that's like that's very beautiful. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I have to say though, there was also a part where you had to tell the professor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's also it too, right? Is that, but I also understand it from like the professor's standpoint, where it's like you don't want to put someone on the spot because you're not sure, like, where they are in their faith. And so I definitely like, granted, are you able to almost just like look at the times of prayer and just be like, okay, we're just going to have a break regardless, and kind of like I guess, be able to design the class in that way, yes, but I also understand that at a certain point, like you do have to communicate that need, just because you can't anticipate like everybody within your class is gonna have the same, is gonna be in following the faith within the way that they believe fit and all of that. But yeah, I guess like
Yeah.
that everybody is within their own journey on that. Yeah.
Well, I'm also having a reaction too, or a thought, more of an
Yeah.
idea, which is, as professors or as supervisors,
Mm,
it's also important for us to ask, when we send out the syllabus, any accommodations, please
yes,
email, back channel me, or send me an email so you can prepare
absolutely.
for upcoming semester.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 No,
Hmm.
that very much is true, is like being able to do such, of like asking ahead of time, like if anybody does require accommodations. Yeah, absolutely. Especially even like during the month of Ramadan, right? Like having to fast. And so by making sure that like people are just a little bit more attentive of maybe like not eating in front of others, or by making sure that like when we do have community events or like campus events, to make sure that like if it is going to be within the month of Ramadan, to just do it a little bit later, just to make sure that you are accommodating as many people as possible.
Any other tips you're hoping that current supervisors who are
Mm,
listening, or future supervisors, and I'm also assuming that supervisors are part of training programs,
yes.
things that they can maybe do for themselves internally or with the community in a way to actively address Islamophobia so that we can create an inclusive training environment.
I think one of them is definitely learning more about how Islam and psychology really do go hand in hand. And I think there's usually this assumption that you have to pick like one or the other. I would say that it's almost like I don't like when at times it's made to seem as if it's like they're at odds. So we, like, one of the big things that we talk about right now is like mindfulness, right? And like we love to talk about how it originated from Buddhism, and we kind of brought it over and like kind of whitewashed it a bit to make it more,
Thank
you
you.
know.
Thank you for saying that.
No,
Yes.
seriously. And like we kind of just like marketed it to everybody, and then not realizing that it's like, yeah, you actually took this beautiful thing that is like, that is very much within a specific spiritual group, and so you kind of just like commodified it. And so one of the things is that, oh, how do we make sure that we are making mindfulness like culturally competent? I don't think that's the right question. I think the right question to ask is, okay, if we look into other practices, if we look into other faiths, we can see this string of mindfulness. It's called different things in different faiths and different groups. It's called something different, but you can always see the essence of it somewhere. And I think that that's how we need to be pulling a lot of our concepts. So specifically when talking about, when having to interact with like, when you do have Muslim students that you're training or that you're supervising, I think one of it should be not more of like, oh, how do we make sure that this is like more applicable to Muslim communities or to Amina community? It's almost like, I think that's where the education piece is missing, of like, oh, but if you did look into a lot of during the Islamic Golden Age, a lot of the prominent scholars very much started making connections of the mind and body, and talking about that spirituality, and talking about depression and the way that it manifests, and like how to combat it. And so we are talking about this happening, I think it was 600 AC. I think it was like after. And so it's like, this is what they had already done. And it was only in, what is the lovely date that we always anchor in for clinical psych? Oh, like in 1904, right? Or like 1908, that's when William Wundt came up with clinical psychology. And it's like, no, that's not how it is, right? And somehow, some way, we kind of started using, at least I can speak for my community, where we never had this understanding mental illness being due to satanic play, or like the fact that it's like it's due to the devil, but rather it's like we always knew that there was a connection between mind and body. And how do you make sure that you balance those two out, where then you started seeing it all of a sudden shift. And we now started to embody, which was something that was actually Eurocentric, that this type of belief that mental illness is due to possession of the devil, all of that, like always like this evil spirituality, which if we just knew our history better, we would actually be able to connect it and actually be proud of the fact that this was already talked about, this was already studied. Even when we talk about Avicenna, right? Like his name is Ibn Sina, but it, you know, they kind of renamed it as Abyssinia. And so we also anchor a lot of our philosophy from, like within the US, we anchor a lot of our philosophy models, as well as some of our psychology models based on his works. And if only people knew that it's like, yeah, this was actually a guy that is Persian during the Islamic Golden Age that came with these ideas, it would only be a little bit better.
Wow. I wish I had you as my history of psychology instructor.
Thanks. I don't know that much.
Well, but you know, we need to be exposed to this, because otherwise people start with, oh yeah, you know, William James is sort of the right.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Modern psychology, because then if you, I mean, I just drawing from the Buddhist background, it's like Buddhism was about conditioning. You know, it was about behaviorism. You know, it's like the scent, attachment. You know, all these things. There's like conditioning effects. So okay, we're just using terminology. Different ideas, right, right. Oh, I really love that you're saying it's not about adapting mindfulness to different cultures. Instead, there's threads of mindfulness already in existence in other cultures, spiritual practices.
Absolutely.
So we're asking the wrong question here. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. It's quite profound, because not many folks are asking these questions. Too often we're asking the question of how do we culturally adapt.
And
I'm guilty of that.
But to be fair, you're also part of the system of, you know, having to learn psychology in one way, right? And so I think we start to adopt it. Like I'm guilty of it too, you know, like both of us are part of this system where we think that it's just one culture that is, you know, there within psychology, not realizing that, wait, if we just actually did a little bit more digging and realize that no, there's a lot of it within other cultures, other spiritualities that we could just pull from and make it and actually make it more salient for the client that's in front of us, make it more digestible for the client.
Yeah. Okay. So these are big topics. We can go on. So, but you know, just due to interest of time, as well as, you know, we're recording this as part of Arab American Heritage series. So I really appreciate the conversation and the topic. You know, your advocacy is phenomenal. I mean, you're actually connecting with imams, right? To have them be familiar with mental health resources. I mean, that's incredible, because oftentimes psychologists are like, oh no, hands off. I'm gonna step away from spiritual organizations or institutions. And but you are actually essentially in the mosque, just providing these, but providing these resources and doing the trainings. Also your research. So taking all this together, share with me, or share with our listeners, any memorable events that influenced how you got into this type of work.
Oof. I will say that like my love for forensic psychology definitely came first. I will say that at that time, I think it was the reviving of the Central Park Five and learning. So the Central Park Five, it was a brutal rape case that had happened in Central Park. This was like before my time. And I believe it was like early 90s. And what ended up happening was these 5 young Black boys were arrested, rounded up, and basically they were put into interrogation, and they were interrogated for so long that each and every single one of them just like finally cracked and then implicated the others, right? And some of them hadn't even met one another before either. So it's like, unfortunately, with the way that it happened, and they did not have any type of representation, they did not have parents present, their parents didn't even know where they were. And one of the boys, it was so sad that he just came to support his friend, and he was waiting outside for him, only to the police to drag him in and put him into an interrogation room. And they were charged very severely. They did not even get within the New York justice system. They ended up being tried as adults. And we are talking about like 15-year-olds, like,
Oh gosh.
very, very young. And so they spent a very, very long time in prison. And so I believe at that time, we were going through it in class. Like, we were talking about that case. We were talking about the missteps within the justice system and the culmination of missteps that basically caused these 5 boys to miss out on so much in life, to experience such brutality in prison. And so, and that they were finally exonerated, but the years that they, unfortunately had to spend behind bars, and the trauma that they had to go through. And to me, it was almost like, I just have this like natural, I guess for me, it's almost like a visceral reaction of like, I hate to see injustice. I think if I see someone being treated bad, that to me is very much like, how dare you? Like, what type of power do you think you have over another human being to do something?
It was an abuse of power.
Yes,
That's what it felt like.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Eh,
think that was one of the things that really,
Wow. Wow. May I ask, when you read about that study, was that what influenced you to get into forensic psychology?
It was honestly like one of the, I would say it definitely played a key role. I remember also having a really good forensic psychology professor that kind of really took my interest and like allowed me to join her lab too in undergrad. And so that even pushed me further, because she did a lot of juvenile cases, specifically with plea deals, and kind of uncovering the misfortunes within plea deals, and basically how a lot of young Black and Latino boys get sucked into the judicial system without even, not even having done anything, but just wrong place, wrong time. And
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
definitely fueled it.
Now, we'll try to. I'll try to look for some resources on the Central Park Five and include that in the show notes. Do you
Yeah.
recall if psychologists were involved at all in that process?
Honestly, I don't remember if they ever had to do any type of evaluations. I'm not so sure, but I know that like they used to have, like, one of them would usually be in the infirmary a lot because he was a young kid in an adult prison. So that opened up a lot of abuse, whether it was physical or sexual abuse. But I can't remember specifically if they had any contact with psychologists. But I know that afterwards they definitely talked about the experience that they faced and the trauma that they had, that they endured, from it.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
I would say that one of the things was working so like in the independent like living, where it was like the residential, it was like a residential slash like independent living. I would say that being within that space, you almost had to combat the white savior mentality a lot, where our population, my clients were very much, it was a mixed bag, right? Like, I had African American, I had Latino, I had white. It was definitely a mixture of clients. And I think, and because they had such severe diagnoses, you would see that like clinicians would definitely be burnt out. But you also saw it that sometimes the care that they would provide to the clients would be a little bit subpar, because they almost had this idea of, I actually remember someone saying like, oh, this is as good as it's going to get, like this is all that they can, they won't be able to find any type of other treatment, better treatment type of mentality. And so I think that used to be super difficult to have to hear that, and to have to know that a client is suffering because of that mentality of like, oh yeah, I can just do my job halfway and it's perfectly fine, because at least I'm giving them some type of time, at least I'm giving them some type of attention. And so I think that I used to also get into a lot of very much like professional arguments, or trying to just like understand it better of like, okay, well, this client is very much decomping right now and they are not doing great. I think there needs to be some sort of intervention, and unfortunately it was always seen as like, well, I have this going on, and it's like, oh, okay, so we're just going to allow the client to just to use their own devices to be able to get better, or to be able to quiet down the voices that they were experiencing. And so, and also I found at times that for specifically with my clients that were of color, I would have to combat a lot of the stigma that they would face. So I remember like one of my clients, he was Black, he was Muslim, and he specifically wanted to work with me. And I remember in his charts, they would always write that he was paranoid. But when I looked back at like his history, I saw that it's like he lived in an area where very much it was under surveillance by the FBI during that time. It was in the 60s. And so, and his father used to always tell him like, hey, be careful, like you don't know what's going on, this and that. And so it made a lot of sense. And I remember having to bring that up and be like, actually, if we look at the historical context, he's not wrong. Like this is not paranoia, but this is a real life belief because of what he experienced. And I remember being told that it's like, at a certain point you have to get over it, or like we can't always live in fear forever type of thing. And I was like, well, I don't, that's kind of easier said than done. Right. And so
yeah, it's like, how do you help someone understand that you have this fear, you can still live in some degree of fear, and also start to incorporate maybe more reward or more valued type of living decisions, as opposed to just fear being your primary model. So what you're saying here is, as a person of color, you felt like you had to advocate more for your clients. And not just that, but you also saw more of your client's story than maybe, say, your white counterparts may have seen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. How did you overcome that? Because I would imagine, you're not necessarily picking fights, but you're like, hey, yeah.
I will say it definitely was burned out. Definitely getting burnt out a lot. I won't lie. I think it was almost like, okay, how do we connect you to other providers as well? How do we make sure that you're getting resources elsewhere too? Like you can still definitely be within this type of environment, still be getting the counseling that you need, but also how do we make sure that we establish this other avenues of where you can get care, right? Like whether you're going to be going to support groups more, whether if you wanted to get more involved in church, let's find you a church that's nearby that you could walk to, and that's the way that you're going to be. Like, how do we fulfill these other facets within your life? Therefore, this one entity does not outweigh or kind of like consume you. And so, and even finding ways of like, okay, how do we make sure that I link you with a psychiatrist that is going to be listening to you more? If you want to switch psychiatrists, we can do that. Yes, you might still have to have the same you might still have to have the same clinician, you might still have to have the same case manager, but there's other ways within the system that we can try to get you linked to other people that will advocate for you more, that will listen to you more. So that's kind of how I tried to operate.
Yeah, kind of keeping your eyes and ears open for other folks that may be more willing to work with said client.
Yeah.
Also, like you've done, which is recognizing, gosh, well, therapy doesn't just happen here in independent living facility. It also happens out in the community. So hence your advocacy work totally makes sense. And I'm also thinking about, well, for you, what does it mean to be an Arab, what would you say that, an Arab North African therapist or Arab American North African therapist? So I'm actually wondering how.
No, honestly, it's like, so here's, I guess this is I usually will say like Egyptian. I feel like that encompasses the multitude of the identity of it being both like African and both Arab. And so like, for me, I think being like a Muslim Egyptian therapist, I would say it's definitely, I think it's very fulfilling. It's challenging, but I like to say that I was put in these positions for a reason. I think there's a, basically, there's kind of like a, within Islam, we believe that if you see injustice anywhere, you need to do whatever you can to be able to combat that. And so to me, I kind of take that as very much to the core of everything that I do. And so I like to say that the reason I'm put into a lot of these different situations is that I very much am willing to advocate. I'm very much willing to speak up as to what's going on. And I very much love to empower those that are around me, especially those that are from marginalized communities, because, you know, society has done so much to tear them down and to tear us down, right? And so how do you make sure that you're breathing a little bit of life back into the client, you know? Because if you're able to help that one person, you're able to also help the 5, 10, 6, you know, like 5 or 10 people that they're surrounded with too, because they're going to start to influence a lot of positivity within those around them. And I kind of see it as like this cycle, right? Like that, it's kind of like this growing cycle of like just helping one person. You're kind of like helping.
Like a domino effect.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah. But yeah.
I didn't know that there is this saying in Islam where you're needing to fight the injustice or step in and advocate. Essentially, I mean, we're talking about social justice, right? Concepts. It's even within Islam. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Russell, how do we support you?
Oh man. That's such a great question that I'm so terrible at answering. I think it's definitely by being able, I think you do an amazing job of being able to amplify marginalized voices. And I feel like by being able to do such, it starts to normalize that this is not just the experience of one, but the experience of many from many different communities. And so therefore, it's no longer about how do we accommodate, but rather how do we make space to actually allow these experiences within the room, within every single room that we go into. And so specifically when we talk about educational institutions, when we talk about professional institutions, it's almost like this shouldn't be an afterthought, but rather it should always be at the forefront that not everybody's going to be like you, not everybody's going to have the same experiences as you. And so therefore you should always have people within the room that come from diverse backgrounds, that have different perspectives, that not only does it help your organization grow, but it definitely makes room for others to really feel like they're part of something bigger and helping their communities. And so I think this, you know, your podcast is a very great job of being able to target listeners to have a different perspective, to start looking specifically within psychology, start looking at it from a different lens. And so I think it just, you know, like we said, the domino effect, right? Like you're starting with like one, and then it's like multiple people are starting to also make those changes little by little.
How about our listeners? What can they do to support you?
Honestly, I feel like by definitely listening to their students, I think number one, if you are a psychology professor, if you're a mentor, if you're a supervisor, I feel like just listening to your students, understanding that you have your own experiences and you have your own education, but they as well could educate you. Education, in my opinion, is a two-way street. And so we can learn so much from each other. And I guess maybe am I still talking like more general, or am I talking like more myself? I feel like I'm talking about myself, but I'm like making it very general. So I don't know if I'm answering your question fully.
Oh, I think, you know, actually a lot of folks say by supporting me, you know, in some ways you're supporting the community, you're also supporting me. That's sort of the angle that a lot of folks say, because it's going to make your work easier, because then you're not like the go-to person, right? Which I think oftentimes folks who are from marginalized communities get put on the spot as, oh, now I speak for my entire community. Whereas like, let's say you're in a multicultural counseling class, suddenly, you know, you're the only one with the hijabi, and suddenly you speak for all Muslim folks. You're like, why? And so, but because we're on this podcast, I actually do appreciate you speaking with us about this. Yeah.
No, but that actually you made like a really great point too of like the tokenism of it, right? Like that, and also understand that it's like my perspective is one perspective. It is not understanding the fact that it's like I hold my own perspective because of my own experiences and my own biases, and so understand that if you are going to come across another, let's say it's going to literally be another Egyptian Muslim hijabi woman, like understand that we are definitely, it's not always going to be the same. And I think that's the lovely part about it, is that we all have something to contribute and we all have different experiences. But yeah.
Well, Russell, thank you so much for sharing your perspective.
No, thank you.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.